The Mystery of the Cupboard by Lynne Reid Banks. Chapter 9. Frederick. I am Frederick Anthony Driscoll. I was born in this house more than 50 years ago. The son of an unknown father, I am a plain businessman who does not pretend to any talent for this kind of writing. I do it only because my mother is dying and has made it her last request. She has sent for me because she wants this account she has begun completed, and she is no longer able to hold a pen. She says there is no one else. I am aware of my debt to her, and that I have not been the son she would have wanted. We have never got along. It is a sad thing to say, but it is the truth, and she acknowledges it as she lies there. We are different kinds of people. Everything I write here will be read to her. I am to write nothing behind her back, and add and alter nothing after she dies. This is our agreement. She asks me to write of my childhood, but I cannot bring myself to do it. I did not start living until I became independent, when I was about 23, following my mother about during her so-called stage career, and living in between in a dismal succession of sordid lodgings and rooms that blighted my childhood. I acknowledge that my mother made many sacrifices for my education, but the school she sent me to at such expense, though for some childish reason I never told her till now, a place of loneliness, hardship, suffering, where I was brutally beaten for trifles, half-starved and bullied. As for college, I consider it taught me nothing of any practical value. My real school was the School of Life and Business. I entered the metal trade as a young man. I started, I am not ashamed to say it, through my mother, who had expected me to enter one of the professions, was scandalized at the time as a scrap iron dealer, later getting work at a foundry where I soon became a supervisor and later manager of the plant. By the time I was 37, I had my own small factory. I made what were commonly called tin soldiers, in fact made of lead, and many other metal toys. My mother has just dryly suggested that I was in search of my lost childhood. Poppycock. I was in search of a respectable livelihood. On the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, the government ordered me to turn my factory over to the production of ammunition for rifles. I did not want to do this, but was keenly interested in the toy business. But it would be useless to deny that from a commercial point of view, the war was very good for me. With state money, I was able to enlarge my premises. Raw materials were no problem. I had an abundance of cheap labor, mainly women, and once they were trained, they were very capable and patriotically eager to work hard. Of course, everything we produced was instantly bought by the armed forces. By the time the war ended, I was well off. Some called me a war profiteer. Poppycock again. I did essential war work. Could I help it? If the deprived conditions of my early childhood made me unfit for active service, when the government informed me that I might once again return to peacetime operations, I had no thought but to go back to manufacturing toys, as I had before. It was not to be. I had been so taken up with my war production that I had not kept up with the times. In particular, I was unaware that a new material had reared its ugly head, which was about to revolutionize the toy industry and bring my business to ruin. I refer, of course, to plastics. My mother wants me to admit that my attitude to this accursed new material was in some way exaggerated. I do not admit it. I do not approve of anything, especially emotions, being overblown. Anyone in my position would have been bitter and angry to have his livelihood ruined by this cheap and nasty stuff. I will acknowledge that I hated it. I hated it in all its forms, and I never have, do not now, nor ever will in the future, have anything made out of it in my home. When I encounter it, I turn away my eyes. Metaphorically, I spit on it. The only time I ever handled it unnecessarily was when, exasperated by my mother's inability to understand my point of view, I bought her some early plastic model toys to compare with those I used to manufacture before the war. My workers were craftsmen. Each soldier's uniform, gun, horse, and flag was hand-painted. The moulds for them were made from miniature sculptures, modelled in clay, in intricate detail, by dedicated artists. These beautiful and realistic little lead models were heavy to the hand, well balanced, infinitely rewarding to set up and to knock down in the excitement of mock battle when children's voices would bring the little cannons to life. Marbles flew for cannonballs, and the bright, sturdy ranks were scattered in a scene of realistic carnage. Those were true playthings, bringing joy and education to 1,000 young generals. One day my models will be found in museums and be collector's pieces. Even now they grow rare. They are becoming too valuable to be played with. They must be sheltered behind glass or buried in boxes and drawers. And those who made them are ruined, cast aside, their skills displaced. By what? By cheap, mass-produced, ugly, lightweight rubbish, trash, cast from carelessly made molds, many of the figures not even colored, their destiny so low they need no more than their density so low they need more than a tremble of the floorboards, the vibrations from a child's shout to topple them. A sneeze can blow them over. Children play with them, yes, they know no better. There is no comparison. I pity them. My mother has noticed my slight agitation. She bids me to be calm and keep my narrative. "Tell the tale, Frederick," she says in her husky voice, out of her face like a skull. I confess that I find it hard to look at her now. She used to be a fine-looking woman. I have turned the cupboard away. It does her no good to keep looking at her face in its mirror. She insisted on locking it. First, with that strange little key she keeps around her neck on a red ribbon. She lies now as white as a pillow, the two ends of red ribbon vanishing into her fist where the key is clutched. And there is something else under her pillow that she keeps reaching her free hand up to touch. When I ask her what she hides there, she murmurs, "The little people." Ah, yes, of course, the fairies. The poor woman's mind is wandering. Yes, mother, very well, the tale. There is not much more to tell of myself. I went bankrupt, but they could not keep me down. I could have gone two ways. I could have capitulated and gone into plastic toys, never. Or I could have gone back, in a humble way at first, to honest metal, and that is what I did. I joined a firm making metal boxes of all kinds, filing cabinets, small medicine cupboards, document boxes, trunks for travelers to the tropics, cake and biscuit tins and cash boxes. I am proud of my products, and in no way ashamed of my life. It was not my destiny to marry and have children, considering my own beginnings. I am not sorry. A man who had no father to pattern himself on cannot be a good one. I have read the above to my mother. After all, a few tactful omissions were necessary. She is not satisfied. She insists that I tell about a certain foolish action she persuaded me to, the only irrational act of my life. I have asked what this writing is for, who will read it. I do not wish to make a fool of myself in the eyes of some stranger, but she has sworn that no one shall read it till after my death. Well then, what do I care? We all have our own follies, even the most sane of us. I will do as she wishes. All my life I have been embarrassed by my mother's interest in the occult. This fortune-telling nonsense grated on my nerves. I know it paid for my schooling, which made it worse, but worse still was her insistence that I had inherited some of her gift, as she calls it, her supposed supernatural powers. Poppycock! After my toy business crashed, a great consuming rage came upon me. It seized within me, demanding an outlet. It kept me awake at nights, and even by day. I felt it, gnawing on my mind like a rat. I lost weight. I lost concentration. No doctor could help me, and when my mother said she had a remedy, in sheer desperation I said I would put myself in her hands. This was her bizarre advice. You must put your anger into something. Make a container and put your anger into it. Shut it and have done with it. Absurd, ridiculous. I mocked her then, and I mock myself now for failing to resist the urge to try it. Nevertheless, I made the cupboard. It was a plain thing, like many hundred others in the factory. Like many hundred others, the factory was turning out at the time. The difference was I made this one with my own hands, cut out the sheeting and welded it and fitted the shelf and the mirror and the handle. My mother said, "Good, but you must have a keyhole and a lock, or your anger will escape." Poppycock! I cannot repeat it too often, but I did it. God knows why I did it. And I brought it to her, and she said, "Give me the key to the lock." And I gave it to her. And what should she do but throw it away? Then she said, "Now, Frederick, scrape your head and heart clean of all the anger that is in them against the material you hate." "How?" I asked. "Any way you can," she said. So I shut my eyes and imagined a pail of clear water. I imagined, what folly, I blush as I remember it, that I took out my brain and washed it, and took out my heart and scrubbed it, and the water floated with repulsive little globs of plastic in brown and yellow and blue and black, and solemn as a priest I gathered the awful stuff into my two hands and threw it into the interior of the cupboard. And though all had been imaginary, I, who flatter myself I have no imagination but am a practical man, the gesture of throwing the plastic pieces into the cupboard was real, and my mother slammed the door and locked it, not with its proper key belonging to the lock I had fitted, but with a key I had not then seen before, the one she now clutches in her wasted hand. "There," she said very quietly, "you are free of it." She took the cupboard and put it away. I seem to remember I was ill for some time after this incident. I don't know what was the matter with me. I was weak and sick, assailed and with trembling, and I had no appetite. My mother nursed me herself, and did not call a doctor. She said it was natural and would pass. It did. One morning I woke up as usual at 6 a.m. and felt my old self. A lingering loathing for all things plastic remained, and has remained, but it no longer consumed me. Honesty and my mother's relentless insistence have obliged me to record this childish happening. Interestingly, I recognized the cupboard I had made in the one I found by my mother's bedside, and turned away so that she might not see her face in the mirror. I had not seen it since, but I knew it was the same because I recognized some little detail of its making. Some weakness made me unwilling to open it, but I forced myself, half expecting to find what, I don't know. At all events, it was quite empty. Personally, I have no doubt my own strength of will was the real cure for whatever temporarily troubled me. And that's the end of chapter 9.